Welcome to Pragim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 97 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll discuss about changing password by providing the current password. In fact, in reality, users can change the password anytime by providing their current password. Obviously, for that, they have to be logged in. Okay, so to achieve this, the first thing to do is to write a stored procedure which changes the user's password based on their current password. So if you look at the stored procedure that I have here, the stored procedure name itself is sp change password using current password. And if you look at the stored procedure, it takes in three input parameters: the username for which we want to change the password, the current password, and the new password to which we want to change. Okay, so three input parameters. Now what are we doing here? This is the TBL users table. So if you look at the users table, it has got username and password, and look at this, we are passing in username and current password. Okay, so if the username and current password matches with a row in this table, then for that username we want to update the password with this new password that's coming into the stored procedure. And look at this line here, it's exactly what it's doing there. Okay, select ID from TBL users where username is equal to @username and password is equal to @current password, whatever input parameters that's coming. So if that select query returns something, the exists function will return true. Otherwise, it's going to return false. If it returns true, what are we doing? Okay, if it returns true, we know that the username and password are correct, and for that username, we want to change the password using this new password. And that's what we are doing here. Update TBL users, set password is equal to @new password, where username is equal to, whatever the username that comes in. And finally, what we are doing, select one as is password changed. One, we will convert that to a Boolean value which gets converted to true. Okay, so that in case if the username and current password matches with a row in TBL users table. If it doesn't match, then this exists function will return false, and it comes to the else block. So when it comes to the else block, all we are doing here is select 0 as is password change, because we are not changing the password. Why? He has provided an invalid or wrong current password for that username. Okay, so that's why we are saying select 0 as is password changed. Okay, so we need to invoke the stored procedure obviously from within our .NET application. We are going to continue where we left off in the previous session of this video series. Okay, so first of all, what I need to do when I click the save button, I need to call the stored procedure from our .NET application. And to do that, if you remember in the previous session of this video series, we have written a function, a generic function that executes a stored procedure. All you have to do is provide the name of the stored procedure and the list of parameters it expects. And if you remember, this stored procedure is expecting three input parameters, so we need to supply the list of all these three input parameters. Okay, so I'm going to invoke this function. Okay, and to invoke that function, I have actually written another function here. So let's go ahead and copy that function. And what is the stored procedure called? The stored procedure is called as sp change password using current password. Okay, so I'm going to name my function also accordingly. So I'm going to call this function private change password, change user password using current password. And those are the parameters. And look at that, it's very straightforward. It's exactly similar to how we have invoked the other functions like change user password, is password reset, link valid. It's very similar to those functions. So all you're doing here, the first thing is you're creating a list of parameter object, parameter list. So since that is a list, and since our stored procedure is expecting three input parameters, we need to pass those three input parameters. So this is the first input parameters. @username is the name of the parameter, so @username. And then the most important thing to keep in mind here is, how do I get the username? Because if you look at the change password page, I don't have a text box where I ask the user to enter his username, and it doesn't make sense because the user is already logged in. So we should have an idea about how we can get the logged in user's name. Okay, now to get the logged in user's name, you can use user.identity.name. And look at this name property. It's a string property. We have spoken about this in the previous sessions of this video series when we have discussed about forms authentication. Okay, so this user.identity.name will return the username of the logged in user if the user is already logged in. If the user is not logged in, then user.identity.name, this property will be an empty string. Okay, so that's the key. Okay, so we can get the username using user.identity.name. And look at this, keep this point in mind. User.identity.name will be an empty string if the user is not logged in. Okay, so because we'll be using that point elsewhere to make some decisions. Okay, so that's the first SQL parameter object, and this is the second parameter object. So what's the second parameter? It expects a current password, so that's what we are passing in here, the current password. And again, since the passwords within the database are hashed, we need to hash them before we actually send it to the database. So that's why we are using this function hash password for storing in config file, and we are taking the current password and we are using SHA-1 algorithm to hash it. Okay, so that's current password, and along the same lines new password. And if you remember, new password is coming from txt new password text box that's present on this page. Okay, so we have all the three parameter objects that we want. And once we have this list of parameter objects, all you have to do is invoke that execute sp function and pass the name of the stored procedure that we want to execute. In this case, sp change password using current password, and then the list of parameter objects. And this function is going to return a true or a false, which is what is returned by this function in turn. So all you have to do right now is make some changes to your page load function and to your button click, because look at this page, this one page is going to work for both, for reset password link, when the user clicks on that link, it's going to work correctly, as well as if the user is logged in, when they click on change password, link on any page, they should be able to change the password by providing their current password. Okay, so this page is going to serve both the purposes. So let's see how to do that. So we have to, obviously we have the methods which can do that here, but we need to call them appropriately and at the right time. So to the changes that we have to do within the page load event, let me copy and paste these changes, and then I'll explain what we are doing here. So within the page load event, look at that. The first thing, this is very important line here. Now the user should be able to land on this page, change password page, only on 2 occasions. So this is page load event, and look at what we are doing here. The first check, if request.queryString of UID is null, if the UID is not present, when the user lands on this page, if this UID is not present, and also if user.identity.name is empty, which means that he's an unauthenticated or anonymous user. So if he is anonymous user, and if we don't have a UID within the query string of the URL, then there's no business for the user to be on this page. So what we are doing, we're actually redirecting the user back to the login page. So he cannot come to change password page. Either one of these conditions have to be false for him to actually change his password. So to change his password, he should either be logged in, or if you're not logged in, you have forgotten your password, then there should be a UID. You should have requested for a password reset link to be sent to your registered email address. Okay, so if that's the case, if any of these conditions are true, then the page load continues. This line will not be executed. So what are we doing here? If request.queryString of UID not equal to null, if it's not equal to null, then what does that mean? That means the UID is present within the URL. So if the UID is present within the URL, then we know he's coming to change his password using a password reset link. So if that's the case, we first check if the password reset link is valid or not. And you know what this function does. We have discussed about this in the previous session. If this function is going to return false, then we know that it's the password reset link has expired or is invalid, and that's what is the message that we are showing here. And look at this. This is most important. Tr current password.visible is equal to false. What is this doing here? Because if you remember, on change password page now, we have another text box for the user to enter their current password. Remember, if the user is trying to change their password using a password reset link, they do not provide a current password. So there is no reason for us why this text box and this label should be shown. Okay, so for that purpose, if you look at the HTML here, for this table row, I have included an ID here, tr current password. And I have included this runAt is equal to server attribute, so I can modify the visibility of this table row within the code behind file. So within the code behind file, I'm using that ID, and if there is a UID within the URL, then I know that the user is trying to change the password using the password reset link, and there's no need for this row to be visible, and here I'm setting that to false. On the other hand, if the user.identity.name is not equal to empty string, which means the user is logged in. If this condition is false, it will come here and it will check, okay, is the user logged in? How do we know that? If the user.identity.name is not empty, the user, we have some sort of username there, which means the user is authenticated. Then show the current row, I mean tr current password row. Okay, because he is trying to change his password using his current password. So we should show that row which has the text box for him to enter the new password, I mean the current password. Okay, so that's the change within the page load event. Along the same lines, when I click save button here, I have to call the appropriate function to update the password. Okay, so let's look at what are the changes. Now this is again another simple piece of code. It's just, I mean, we need to understand what we need to call when. So within the button click event, the change that we have to make is this. So if request dot, look at that. So there are two conditions here. One is the first one. So that's the first condition. So what's that condition? If request.queryString of UID is not equal to null. If it's not equal to null, then if this condition is true, only then will it come to this condition and execute this function. Okay, so if request.queryString of UID is not equal to null, then we know that the user is trying to change the password using a password reset link, in which case we want to call the change user password function. We have discussed about this in the previous session of this video series. So if you haven't watched that, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Okay, so if this condition is true, the first condition, if request.queryString of UID not equal to null, then only will it come to this AND part. Otherwise, it will not come to this AND part. Instead, it will check this condition, this one condition here. Okay, so if this condition, the single condition is false, it will skip this and it will come here, user.identity.name. Okay, if that is not equal to an empty string, that means user is trying to change his password, by providing his current password. He's logged in. Okay, so in which case call this function change user password using current password. Now if you're thinking this might cause a performance issue, it won't, because if this condition is false, it will skip executing this function call. Similarly, if this condition is false, it will skip executing this. It will execute this call only if this condition is true. And remember, the same logic applies here as well. Okay, so if any of these conditions, so either this condition or this condition is true, then we know that the user has changed their password successfully, in which case we specify this password changed successfully. Else what we are going to do, we're going to display an error message, but we have to show a correct error message. If the user is trying to change the password by providing their current password, then and if they supply an invalid current password, then we'll have to show invalid current password. And how can we determine that? By using the visibility of this row. If this row is visible, we know that he is providing the current password to change the password. Okay, and if they have failed to update the password, then we know that we have to display this message, otherwise this message. Okay, so let's build this and see if it's going to work. So if you look at currently, the TBL reset request table and TBL users table. In TBL reset request, I have a valid, a reset request there, and that matches this URL that you see here. So it ends in 8FA. So let me go ahead, let me build the application first, Control-Shift-B, and let me click on this URL now. Okay, so I land on this page now. Okay, look at that, change password, look at that, tr, the current password. There's no provision for me to enter a current password. I can go ahead and change my password. So test, and test is the password. I click save, so password changed successfully. Now look at this. If I try to land on this page, I'm not providing the UID and I'm not logged in. So I click enter now. Look at what's going to happen. I am redirected to login page. And why it's that, if you remember, in the page load event, we are doing that check. If the query string is not present with name UID, and if user.identity.name is empty string, it will be empty string here because I'm not logged in. Then redirect me to the login page. Okay, now, okay, let me log in now. I know the username is test and the password is test. So I log in, and look at this. On the welcome page, I have this change password link. I click on this change password link and it takes me to the change password page. Look at that. Now I am logged in. Now when I click on this change password page, look at that. I landed on change password page and I'm here, and look at this, current password is shown. So I can change my current password to a new password. Okay, so I'm providing my current password test and my new password is test1. I click save. Look at that, password changed successfully. Now let me try to change it back to test1. So I provided my current password. Let me provide an invalid current password, and maybe that's my new password. Confirm new password, and I try to click this. Look at that, invalid current password. It gives the error message also a meaningful error message. Okay, and on the other hand, look at that, I try to click on this link again. So if you remember, this link is not a valid link anymore, because why? I changed my password once, so that's gone there. We don't have a reset, an entry in TBL reset password request table. So obviously now when I click on this link, when the page loads up, look at that, password reset link has expired or is invalid. Now I'm trying to change the password in spite of the link having expired, and I click save. Look at what's going to happen. Password reset link has expired or is invalid. Okay. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.